Hi, I'm Darlene. Ever watched your own wedding dress get zipped up by someone else, while your mom looked you in the eye and said, "She deserves it more than you"? That was the day something in me shifted. Not just because of the dress, but because of what it confirmed. I was never the favorite. I was just the placeholder. Have you ever felt like your presence in the family was optional? Let me know below. I had just set the kettle down when the doorbell rang. No message, no call, just the sound that always made my chest tighten. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not both of them. When I opened the door, there they stood. Mom, clutching a garment bag with practiced indifference. And Maura, glowing, humming some tune as if the whole world was playing her soundtrack. "Surprise," she said, already brushing past me. I stepped aside, too stunned to form a sentence. I hadn't invited them. My apartment smelled faintly of lavender and toast, as if it knew I needed something soft today. It wasn't enough. "I brought the dress," Mom said, walking in like she owned the floorboards. "We thought Maura could try it on here. Lighting's better." I blinked. "What dress?" She hung the garment bag on my coat rack, unzipped it, and revealed the soft ivory lace I had folded myself that very morning. My dress. "I picked it up last week when I stopped by," Mom added, breezy. "It was just collecting dust." I didn't move. My mouth went dry. I had wrapped it with such care, planning to show it to Clay this weekend. It was mine, not just legally, not just sentimentally. I had saved for it, chosen it, imagined myself walking in it. Maura slipped off her coat and beamed at me. "You're gonna love this." I stood frozen as she disappeared into the bathroom. I could hear the sound of the zipper, the rustle of tulle and satin. When she emerged, twirling in my living room mirror, the words came. Mom didn't even blink as she delivered them. "Give it to her. She deserves it more than you." That sentence didn't hit like a slap. It settled deeper. Somewhere marrow deep. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there and watched her. Maura's reflection shimmered, delighted with her own image. "It's perfect, right?" she giggled. "It fits like it was made for me." I felt the edge of the counter pressing into my palms. I wanted to say 1,000 things, but my lips were strangers to me. Mom waved a hand like she was brushing away a fly. "It was just hanging in your closet, honey. And Maura's wedding is coming up so soon. Yours is, eventually." Eventually, as if my life were a delay she had grown tired of waiting on. Maura looked over her shoulder. "I mean, no offense, Dar. It's just a dress." Just a dress. The same dress I had saved for months to buy. The one I had pulled down from the rack like it was whispering yes to me. The one I thought might mark a new beginning. My beginning. I didn't speak. I just turned, walked down the hall, and closed my bedroom door. Not locked. That would imply confrontation. I sat on the edge of my bed, the fabric of my skirt bunching under my palms. I stared at the empty hanger swinging in my closet like it missed something. In the living room, Maura laughed again. She was always laughing. I reached for the old notebook on my nightstand. Not to write. I just needed to hold something that still felt mine. It was bent at the corners, worn from years of being my quietest companion. I pressed it to my chest, let the silence pool in my ears, drown out the mirror click of heels in the other room. Then I stood. I looked at myself in the mirror, pale, still. My reflection didn't flinch. "I'm not screaming," I whispered to no one. "I'm just remembering." This wasn't just about lace, or zippers, or twirling. This was about years of being almost, being nice, being invisible, and something inside me was done being silent. It's not just a dress, and I'm not just the sister anymore. 3 days after they left my apartment, I got a text from Mom. "Maura needs you at the shop today, just for feedback." It wasn't a question, just a line of expectation. I didn't want to go, but I did. That's what I'd always done. Show up, even when I wasn't invited to matter. The bridal boutique smelled like orchids and starch. I remembered the scent, even before I stepped inside. It was the same place I found the dress. My dress. Except now, it didn't look like mine anymore. Maura stood in front of the mirror, arms lifted as the consultant adjusted the sleeves. The hem was shorter. The neckline had been raised. New beadwork lined the bodice. Lace sleeves. She added lace sleeves. It finally feels like mine, Maura said, beaming at her reflection. Mom clapped her hands lightly, proud of a masterpiece neither of them had created. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but the words never made it out. The consultant turned toward me. What do you think? It looks different, I said softly. My voice landed like a dropped pin on a marble floor, barely audible but sharp. Maura didn't notice or didn't care. We're thinking maybe adding a sheer overlay too, she continued. It needs that floating feel, you know? I didn't nod. I just stood there, watching something I chose, something that felt like me, get carved into someone else. There was a moment, weeks ago, when the consultant had zipped me into that gown and said, "This one feels like you." She smiled as I cried in the fitting room. Not because it was expensive, not because it was beautiful, but because it fit without forcing me to shrink or stretch. Now, it was no longer mine. Not just the dress, the moment, the meaning. That night, back home, I opened my bank app to transfer money for groceries. There was a new transaction, $3,000, gone. Withdrawn from the joint account I'd been quietly contributing to since Mom said we'd build family savings together. I stared at the number, then scrolled down. The note said, "Catering deposit, Maura's wedding," I called. Mom answered like she was folding laundry. "Oh, that? We needed to book the caterer, sweetheart. And since your wedding isn't anytime soon..." I didn't hear the rest. My head buzzed. Not loud, not violent. Just that numb ring that comes when disappointment isn't a surprise anymore. I didn't ask why she hadn't told me. I didn't scream. I didn't even say my name. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the reflection in my closet door. They took from me like I was just a placeholder, like my future didn't count. I wanted to tell Clay, but when he came over, all I said was, "It's fine, I'll figure it out." He looked at me a second longer than usual. "What happened?" "Just some wedding stuff," I lied. He nodded slowly, didn't push. He poured wine. I smiled like I was fine. And maybe I was. Or maybe I was just learning to disappear in quieter ways. If I was losing pieces of myself, I wondered how long it would take until there was nothing left to recognize. I ate dinner at the kitchen counter, the kind of meal you prepare when hunger is an afterthought. Dry toast, half a pear, and tea gone lukewarm. I didn't taste any of it. I just sat, fork in hand, staring at the untouched plate like it might speak first. My phone lit up with a voicemail notification from Mom. "If you could just send another $500, I know you understand. It's part of being the little sister." I played it 3 times, not because I didn't hear her, but because I didn't want to believe she said it like that. So easy, so entitled. Like understanding meant complying. Like my role had been printed on a birth certificate I never got to read. I did understand. I understood that I was never allowed to say no. The sound of the fridge humming behind me was louder than I remembered. I turned my head to the right, to the hallway closet I hadn't opened in months. There was a small, beat-up box inside, marked "Private" in shaky blue pen. I didn't need to read the label to know what was in it. I reached for it with hands that shook a little. Inside, beneath old birthday cards and a dried flower pressed between pages, was a notebook. Spiral-bound, edges frayed. I flipped it open and saw the first line of a poem I wrote in 7th grade. "She wore a heart she couldn't carry." I smiled, not because it was good, but because I remembered how proud I was to write it. And then my phone buzzed. Maura. She sent a photo, the notebook, that exact notebook, resting on her lap, captioned, "Still writing fairy tales?" My throat tightened. It wasn't just the message, it was that she still had it. All these years, not to return it, not to apologize, but to laugh at it. Again. I closed my eyes, and the past spilled through. 12 years old. Gym class. I remember hiding behind the bleachers, red-faced, as Maura read my poem to her friends, laughing, mimicking my voice, calling it tragic princess stuff. I didn't eat lunch that day, or the day after. It was the moment I stopped writing, the moment I learned silence was safer than sharing. And now, decades later, here I was, with that same notebook, that same girl, and the same laugh, just filtered through an iPhone. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The kitchen lights flickered slightly. Probably a bulb about to die, but it felt poetic in a way I hadn't let myself think for years. How many times had I handed her my voice just so she could echo it louder? I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just breathed in the scent of old paper and memory. The betrayal was never in what she said. It was in how easily people around her laughed with her, how quickly my pain was reframed as too sensitive, how my silence became the proof that I could handle it. Each time I said nothing, the wall grew taller. Not around me, but between me and the version of myself that once believed she had something worth saying. I closed the notebook slowly, and instead of shoving it back into the box, I placed it at the center of my desk. No apology, no dusting off, just claiming space. Maybe it wasn't silly, maybe it was sacred, and maybe next time she laughed, I wouldn't stay silent. The smell of rosemary chicken wafted through the house when I stepped inside. It was supposed to be a casual family dinner, something to keep things light before the wedding, as Mom put it. I hadn't even set my purse down when I saw it. A massive canvas print hung over the fireplace. The entire family, Mom in her favorite red, Dad in a navy blazer, Maura glowing in white, Ashton smiling proudly beside her, and me, nowhere. I blinked once, twice. It didn't change. Maura looked up from the sofa and grinned. "Do you like it? It was from the engagement brunch last month." "When was this taken?" I asked, too calmly. Mom didn't flinch. "Oh, sweetheart, you wore that mustard yellow blouse. It clashed with the setup. We just didn't include that one." Didn't include that one. Dad looked away, already sipping his wine. Ashton cleared his throat, politely confused. I stood there like someone reading their own obituary. We sat down to eat, the photo still looming above us. Its silence said more than any toast ever could. Dinner was a blur. Maura recounted some story about her wedding playlist, about how she convinced the DJ to work in Taylor Swift between the string quartet numbers. Everyone laughed. I smiled without showing teeth. I sat beside Dad, who stared at his plate like it held answers. He didn't look at me, not once. Their voices became background noise, echoes. My fork moved, but I didn't taste anything. Then Maura brought up middle school. "Remember when Darlene wrote that poem about being invisible?" she said between bites. She was so dramatic, hid under the bleachers for hours. The table chuckled. Even Mom smiled faintly. I couldn't breathe. She didn't just bring up the poem. She brought up the day, the humiliation she remembered. And she still laughed. She had taken my diary, read it aloud in gym class, mocked every word while I curled up behind the bleachers, willing myself to disappear. I went home that night and threw the notebook away. I didn't write again for years. No one came looking for me. Not then, not now. I pushed my chair back quietly, stood and said I needed to use the restroom. But instead, I wandered into the guest bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, hands clenched into fists so tightly they trembled. I tried to remember the last time someone had looked at me during a family gathering and seen something more than an empty seat filled out of guilt. Maybe never. Outside the door, I heard laughter again. My name wasn't in it. If pictures were proof of love, then I had none. And I wasn't sure if I ever really did. The house was still half asleep when I stepped outside. The air smelled like damp leaves and last night's leftovers. I didn't expect to see anyone, but there he was, my father, sitting on the patio in the same chair he always used to read the paper in, long before he stopped reading anything that didn't come with silence. He held a small wooden box in his lap. Not tightly, not like it held something precious, more like it was waiting for someone else to decide its worth. He looked up as I approached but didn't speak, just motioned to the empty chair beside him. I sat. We listened to the birds and the distant hum of Pasadena traffic. He didn't ask how I'd slept. I didn't ask if he remembered what Maura said last night. After a while, he opened the box and turned it toward me. Inside was a hairpin. Silver. Simple. Delicate. "Your grandma's," he said. "Your mom thought Maura would wear it, but I thought maybe you should." He didn't say sorry. He didn't need to. I didn't cry. I just held it. It felt like a piece of history I didn't know I was still allowed to have. Not a token, not a bribe. just a quiet acknowledgement from someone who'd stood too long on the sidelines. We didn't say anything else. He went back to staring at the bougainvillea vines. I slipped the box into my jacket pocket and left through the side gate. Later that afternoon, I met Clay at a coffee shop we used to frequent back when we thought date nights could fix stress. He was already seated, a cup waiting for me. "You okay?" he asked gently. I sat down, unzipped my coat, and for the first time in weeks, I told him everything. Not filtered, not softened. About the dress, the account, the photos, the silence, the notebook, all of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell me to breathe or suggest I talk to a therapist. He just listened, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. When I finished, I looked down, bracing for advice. Instead, he leaned in slightly and said, "If you ever feel like doing something, I'm behind you. But it has to come from you." It wasn't a push, it was space. It was the first time someone left the door open and didn't try to walk through it first. We didn't talk much after that. We just sat. Comfortable, tired, a little more whole than we'd been an hour before. That night, I placed the hairpin on my dresser. Not in a drawer, not hidden. Right in the middle, like it belonged. I stood in front of the mirror, held it up to my temple, and clipped it into place. Not for a wedding, not for anyone watching, just for me. The woman in the reflection didn't look victorious. She didn't look strong. She looked like someone who had finally stopped handing away the little things, just to prove she could survive without them. What if the point wasn't to fight them? What if it was just to stop handing them the pieces of me they hadn't earned? The blooming cup was half full that afternoon, the clinking of coffee cups and hushed conversations making the perfect cover for what Trina slid across the table. Her laptop screen lit up with a diagram, color-coded and annotated like a blueprint for something far more complicated than it looked. "Irrigation," she said, tapping a corner of the image, "but the fountain system runs on the same control panel. One valve, one switch. You set the timer here." I leaned in, more curious than cautious. "I'm not saying I'll do anything," I said. Trina didn't blink. "I just want to understand. What's possible?" She nodded once, then closed the laptop and pushed it aside. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't seem to notice. Neither did I. Back home, I kicked off my shoes by the door and walked straight to the living room. I didn't bother with the lights. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, back against the couch, and pulled a notepad from the coffee table. I started sketching the dress. Not the version Maura had turned it into, but the one I'd first imagined. The way it flowed. The shape that made me feel like my own story had a silhouette. Halfway through the sketch, I crossed it out. Started again. This time, it wasn't even a dress. It was movement. It was fabric undone. It was air. A shape without a body. Not for me, not for her, just to get it out. I set the pad aside and picked up my phone. Instagram loaded slowly, as if it already knew what was waiting for me. There it was, Mom's newest post. Maura in the dress. My dress. Caption, "My perfect daughter. My dream come true." There were hearts, comments, compliments, the usual parade of relatives and old friends who only showed up when something glittered. One comment caught my eye. "This must be Darlene's wedding?" And underneath it, Mom's reply, "No, this is the real bride." Real. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't scream. I just set it down beside me like something hot I'd finally decided I wouldn't hold anymore. She didn't just take the dress. She took the story. She rewrote the lead character and erased me in the footnotes. I stood up, my knees cracked, loud in the quiet apartment. I texted Trina, "Tell me what I need to wear. I'll meet you by the valve." I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't second guess it. I left the lights off and walked to the bedroom, pulled out the outfit I had worn to job interviews, funerals, and one terrible birthday dinner where no one sang. I laid it across the bed, neat, intentional. Then I sat beside it and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, just to breathe. They told my story for years. But this chapter, this one, I'll write myself. The backyard looked like a postcard. String lights draped from the old oak to the patio, flickering like someone had programmed them to sparkle in sync with Maura's laugh. A long banquet table stretched across the lawn, layered with linen and crystal. Everything perfectly arranged for a night that wasn't supposed to be about me. And it wasn't. Ashton stood tall beside her, holding her hand as if they were already married. Maura glowed, as she always did when all eyes were on her. I sat at the far end, closest to the garden wall, my chair just slightly outside the circle of warmth created by the lights. When Mom tapped her glass and took the microphone, the chatter quieted instantly. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, voice syrupy. "This family, we've had our share of moments, but through it all, one thing has remained constant." She turned to Maura, hand reaching out. "Maura has always been the light of our lives, our joy, our pride." She kissed her on the cheek. Applause erupted like fireworks. My name never came up. I didn't expect it to. Earlier that day, I had checked Facebook. A new post from Mom. "Maura in the dress. My dress." The caption read, "My perfect daughter, my dream come true." Buried in the comments was one from an aunt. "Isn't that Darlene's dress?" Mom had replied with a heart emoji and, "No, this is the real bride." 83 people had liked that response. Not one disagreed. As applause faded, I pushed my chair back. Not loudly, not to make a scene, just enough to stand. "I just want to say," I began, but I didn't get to finish. Dad, sitting beside me for once, reached out and gently touched my forearm. He didn't say a word, just shook his head slowly, like he was calming a child about to misbehave in church, and that was it. The words died in my throat. I sat back down, lips pressed together so tightly they felt bruised. It wasn't just that they didn't want to hear me, it was that they believed I had nothing worth saying. Later, as laughter and wine continued to flow, I slipped away. No one followed. I made it to the guest room, closed the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence in the room felt like a blanket soaked in ice water. My phone buzzed. A message from Trina. "Ready for tomorrow?" I didn't answer, not yet. I looked around the room. Every piece of it was curated for guests, for show, neutral walls, generic art, nothing personal. I realized then that I had been treated the same way. Always acceptable, always temporary. If they wouldn't hear me, maybe they'd finally feel what silence tastes like. Tomorrow, someone's going to listen, even if I have to make the whole room go quiet first. The sky was still gray when I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, birds chirped like the day didn't know what it was about to host. I placed the envelope in front of me, unsealed, the letter inside written in handwriting steadier than I felt. A letter to Mom. It wasn't angry. I had tried that draft first. It sounded like begging. This one was quieter. I apologized for not being enough, for being the other one, and for not becoming what she wanted. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't expect it. I stared at the envelope for a long time before I finally sealed it. If I can't be included, maybe I can at least remove myself. I didn't have a plan after that. Just silence. At 9:12 a.m., I texted Trina. "I'm not coming." No dots appeared. No reply. By noon, my phone buzzed. A photo. The envelope. My envelope. Resting on Trina's doorstep. The caption read, "You sure this is the ending you want?" It hit harder than any speech could have. Not because I regretted writing it, but because I suddenly felt incomplete, like I was halfway through a sentence and someone else had decided to put down the pen. There was a knock. Clay. He stepped inside without speaking, set his keys on the counter like he belonged there, sat across from me, took my hand gently, thumb brushing my knuckles. I said it before I thought about it. What if the only way to win is not to play? He waited, then softly, "Then don't play, but at least walk past the board. Let them see you choose not to." The words hung in the air long after he said them. I stood up, walked to the bedroom, and pulled the black dress from the closet. It had no lace, no shimmer, just fabric. Quiet, clean, no makeup, no jewelry. I wasn't going to perform. I was going to leave my silence where they could see it. I drove to the venue, parked on the road just before the gate. The valet glanced at me, then away. I wasn't on any list anymore. I didn't step out. I didn't need to. From the car I could see everything. White chairs, blush linens, the fountain sparkling under the late morning sun. My dress, or what used to be my dress, flowed around Maura as she posed for photos. I took a long breath. Not shaky, not sad. Just done. I texted Trina. "I won't walk down the aisle, but I'll walk away on my own." And then I did. They wanted a performance. I gave them silence, and for the first time it echoed louder than any vow. From where I stood on the gravel slope just outside the venue, I could see the ceremony unfold like a painting behind glass. Maura glided down the aisle in the altered dress, all pearls and curated perfection. The guests stood. Phones went up. Mom dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. Dad clapped. Slow, polite, flat palms. The kind of applause you give a piano recital when the kid didn't quite hit all the notes. I didn't cry. I let the moment pass over me like a wave I had already learned to stand still through. They celebrated a version of the story where I never existed, and I let them. After the vows, I walked down the narrow path behind the hydrangea hedges, gravel crunching under my flats. My car was parked behind the delivery van, out of sight but not far. Trina leaned against the hood, sipping from a water bottle. She held out another without a word. I took it. We didn't talk much, but before I opened the door, she said, "You rewrote the ending." I nodded, not because I felt victorious, but because I knew she was right. At the reception, plates clinked and music swelled. Guests lined up for photos. The florist hovered, adjusting napkin folds. Mom floated from group to group like she was the one being married. Someone asked about me. "She couldn't make it," Mom replied with that rehearsed smile. But Dad's eyes twitched, just once. He didn't cover for her this time, didn't smile along, and that was enough for a few people nearby to glance sideways. Not a reckoning, but maybe the beginning of a crack. The next morning, before the sun fully lifted from the hills, I drove to my parents' house and stepped onto the porch. The air still smelled like old roses and leftover sugar. I placed the hairpin, Grandma's, on the welcome mat, wrapped in a cloth napkin. Tucked inside, a note. "For the girl you wanted to shine. I don't need it anymore. No knock, no goodbye, just the clarity of release." Back home, I stood in front of my mirror. The hanger where the dress once hung still dangled, empty. But I didn't feel the absence anymore. I pulled out my sketchbook. Not to draw a dress, but something else. I drew a door. Not closed, not open, just slightly ajar. Clay walked in with coffee, setting the mug beside me without saying a word. We stood together, side by side, not needing to fill the quiet. I watched the light shift across the floor, soft and forgiving. I wasn't erased. I walked out of the frame. And maybe that's the first real picture I've ever been in. And if they ever call, maybe I'll answer. Or maybe silence will say it better. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Not in defeat, but in dignity. I used to think I had to earn love by staying silent, by giving, by shrinking myself so others could shine. But the truth is, you don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be angry to reclaim your space. And you don't need their approval to matter. I'm not sharing this to get sympathy. I'm sharing this because maybe you've been in a room where your name was never spoken. Maybe you've felt invisible in the family photo. Maybe you've given too much without being asked how you feel. So here's my question for you. Have you ever walked away from something that didn't see your worth? Or are you still trying to prove yourself to people who stopped listening a long time ago? If this story touched something in you, drop a hot one in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, I'd still love to hear why. Let's talk about it. Your stories matter too. And hey, if you want more stories like this, stories that go beyond the surface and speak to your soul, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Because sometimes, healing starts by hearing someone else say, "Me too." Thank you for being here. Your presence matters.